It's actually crazy because it's almost as if nothing has changed, even when everything has changed. You've already walked 50 miles, and if you walk one more mile, chemistry and Chinese, I have to keep going. Everything that I did before was for nothing. Right now I'm very interested in finance and economics. 4 months ago, I packed my bags, said goodbye to my friends and family, and made the 20-hour flight to Beijing, China. I think it's actually crazy how fast time flies, and honestly, now that I'm back, it feels almost as if the past couple of months have been some sort of fever dream. Like, after coming back home a couple of days ago, I sat back down in my room, I started doing my studying, playing my jazz music. My dogs were at my feet, or one of them was in my lap while I was studying. My dad was in the background watching his news, and my brother was playing his video games in the other room across the hall. And it was actually crazy because it almost felt like the past first semester of college had never happened. And I don't know if this has ever happened to anyone else, but I think it's kind of like once you've been away from a place for so long, but then you go back, it's actually crazy because it's almost as if nothing has changed, even when everything has changed. And I think I'm just still trying to process the fact that I survived a whole semester at Peking University, taking classes in a language that isn't my first, balancing 9 classes on top of all the other clubs and things that I was involved with, and also getting adjusted from that transition between high school and college life. None of that was easy, I would say, and I'm honestly quite proud of myself for having made it this far, but I guess I just wanted to sit down and talk about my feelings and my thoughts and how it feels to have gone by with the first semester of college, the first semester in China, the first semester in being away from my family for so long and being away from my home, because I've lived in the same place for practically as long as I can remember, and it definitely has been extremely hard if you've watched any of my other videos, being away from home. And for anyone that might be new, I should have prefaced this earlier, but I'm an undergrad at Peking University, currently a freshman going into my 2nd semester. I'm majoring in finance as of right now, although that may change depending on how my interests go later on as I continue to take courses, but right now I'm very interested in finance and economics, and so that's what I'm planning on pursuing. But I had previously considered transferring to the medical school, and I think it's actually really funny thinking about how, like, the kind of mindset I was in going in, like, the first week at Peking University, or even when I was talking about, like, if you've watched my Why I'm Moving to China videos that I filmed, like, summer of last year, then you'll know that I was considering transferring to the Beida Medical School, or going directly into the Beida Medical School rather than going to Yuanpei College, which is the college that I'm part of now. But thinking back to it, I'm glad that I did decide to go to the Yuanpei College, because I think it did provide me with so much more flexibility, which I talk about in more detail in my Why I'm Moving to China videos. But I think that it's definitely been quite the long process in, like, figuring out what I actually want to do, or at least figuring out what I don't really want to pursue. So I guess since this is a reflection, I should reflect on how I came to that decision, I guess, in not deciding to transfer to the med school. So essentially, when I went into Beida, I was at the Yuanpei College and I was considering transferring, and so because of that, I took courses that were medical prerequisites, I guess, for first year med school students at Peking University. And so I had chemistry, bio, chem with lab, and of course math, but that was also for my econ finance major requirement. And so I was doing that so that if I did decide to transfer to the med school the second year, I would have those credits, and so I wouldn't have to delay a year, or at least that's kind of like the prerogative that I was working with at the time. But I think that going into chemistry, that was definitely something else. I've made videos on my experience in chemistry in Chinese in a different language was just quite the struggle, I will say. And I think that because I didn't take AP chemistry in high school, my chemistry foundation was already pretty weak, but I do talk about that in more detail in another video. So if that's something you might be interested in learning more about, do check that out after you're finished with this one. But I will just say that it was quite daunting for me to have to learn chemistry in a different language with all the chemicals, because the way they say the chemicals is different too. And so that on top of Chem with Lab, which was 4 hours, it was just a lot. And I think for me personally, I've always been more of a humanities kid, I think I would say. Like, I don't hate chemistry at all. Like, I actually think it's a very interesting, intriguing subject, but I don't love it. And I feel like what was going through in my mind was that, like, for med school, if you're going along that path, it's a very long and tedious kind of process. And if you're not someone who's like 1000% committed, I feel like it can be kind of difficult as to say whether pursuing medicine is for you, because it's so long and it's so tiring. And I truly think that you have to love it, and you have to be absolutely sure that that's what you want to do, and you couldn't see yourself doing anything else if you do go down that path, or that's what I think is recommended. At least that's what I've heard, and that's the advice that I received. And so for me, I feel like medicine is great, and I think the career is amazing, but just I think there are so many other things that I could see myself doing, honestly, so many other things that I feel interested in. And I feel like because of that, I don't think that going into medicine and committing myself to a career that I'm already hesitant to engage in before I've even started, I just didn't think that was the best decision. And so during midterms, I decided to withdraw from chemistry. But for Chem with Lab, I wasn't able to withdraw because they just don't allow that for lab courses for whatever reason. I think it was the right decision in hindsight, because I feel like it's better if you know that something isn't going to work out, or I think it's just like a matter of knowing when to let things go. Because sometimes if you're too obsessive about something or too insistent, or if you get into like that kind of, the sunk cost kind of fallacy theory, where you're like, oh, I've already dedicated so much into this one thing, I have to keep going because otherwise everything that I did before was for nothing. That's actually not the right mindset, or I think that's not the most productive mindset, which is actually something that I learned in economics, which honestly now I feel like after having taken the economics principle course at Peking University, I see things through a fairly different lens. For that course, like if you think like an economist, I feel like a lot of the times you see things like what a normal person that is not thinking from an economic lens would think, you think the exact opposite. So I guess like in terms of like back to what I was talking about the sunk cost kind of like feeling, in reality, when you're considering sunk cost in economics, like that's not a real opportunity cost. That's not a real cost necessarily, in terms of the fact that you can't actually change what has already happened. So like for to put this into perspective, for example, if you've walked like 50 miles from wherever you are and you're about to get home, and you have like, let's say you have another mile left, you've already walked 50 miles and you walk one more mile and you'll finish and reach home. And so now you have the choice of whether, but you're extremely tired obviously at this point after walking 50 miles. So now you have the choice of whether to walk that final mile and make it home, or call a taxi for that one final mile. And so if you're not thinking through an economics lens, you might be like, oh, I've already walked 50 miles, like it's not worth it to call a taxi, I might as well just finish out and like push through this 1 mile. But because you've already walked those 50 miles, that's kind of the prerogative. But in reality, if you think from an economics perspective, those 50 miles, like regardless of whether you call a cab or not for this last mile, you can't change the fact that you already walked those 50 miles. You can't change the fact that you're extremely tired and your feet extremely worn. So when you're considering whether or not you want to call it the taxi, you shouldn't be thinking about those 50 miles that you've already walked. You should just think, in this present moment, if I call a taxi, what is my opportunity cost? And if I don't call a taxi, what is my opportunity cost, right? And so opportunity cost is basically what you're giving up, like the next best thing that you're giving up by making the decision you're making now. And so I think that it applies to this situation, and where it's like, you shouldn't think, oh, like, because for me, when I was taking chemistry, like if I was thinking from one perspective, it could have been like, oh, I've already done half a semester of chemistry, I might as well just finish it out. Like, I've already put in so many hours and so many time, but really that's not what you're supposed to be thinking about. What you're supposed to be thinking about, or what I think was smarter in terms of like economic theory is like, think about, if I continued with this, what is my opportunity cost in the future? Which would be like the constant hours and the time and the energy that I would have to dedicate the second semester if I continue with chemistry. So I think through this logic, it becomes apparent that the best decision really is to just drop chemistry in that moment, because that way you're saving yourself the opportunity cost that you can prevent, the cost and the time and the energy that you can save yourself, because the time and energy that you've already spent can't be changed, it can't be reversed regardless. And so I think that is an interesting perspective for life in general, and maybe something that you all can consider when you're making decisions or making tough life decisions. But I get ahead of myself, and sorry for the rant, but I think that's just one thing that's an update. And so after that, I dedicated a lot of my time to making sure that I was learning math, because advanced mathematics at Peking University is extremely difficult. Like, I took AP BC Calc, like I took the AP exam and I did IB Math Analysis for 2 years, which is basically Calculus 1 and Calculus 2, but I don't think any of that prepared me for the advanced mathematics that I took at Peking University, or that I technically am taking because there's a second semester. But after dropping chemistry and withdrawing from chemistry, I was able to dedicate more time to math, and it was definitely quite the struggle, and especially with the proofs and stuff, which I've also had a video on in terms of like my finals and how I studied for that. But I think it was nice to finally be able to learn things that were relevant to the major that I was actually pursuing, which would be finance. And now that this final semester is over, I'm happy to say that I passed all my classes. But I guess that's another thing that has been pretty hard for me to adjust to, because I feel like in high school, I would work extremely hard. I would be on top of things, and the end result was always fairly decent, I guess you could say. Like, I was an all A student, and I was very used to seeing 90s and aboves. And I think that this first semester has been quite different in terms of the scores that I'm used to. And I think it's just like, it's been frustrating because I'm putting in the same amount of effort, possibly even more effort, but the end result that I'm getting, or the end grade, I guess you could say, is, I feel like, not comparable to the amount of effort that I'm putting in. And it's been very difficult to kind of, I guess, cope with that kind of situation. But I think I have kind of come to terms with the fact that I am doing everything that I can and I'm putting my best foot forward, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. And I feel like college is a time of growth and adjustment and adaptability, and a time where you challenge yourself. And so although my grades aren't as stellar as they were in high school necessarily, I think it's not a comparison game. And I think that as long as I'm growing and I feel like that I'm improving, that's what matters. And I think it's been hard for me too, because I have friends that go to university in the US, and some of them do have like grade inflation. Although I personally haven't been to university in the US, so I'm not really sure entirely how it works, but I do know that grade inflation is talked about to some degree. And so I feel like grade inflation is definitely not a thing at Peking University, which I can understand, but it's just been hard, I guess, to kind of adjust to the grading scale, and seeing my GPA, which has not been horrible, but it's definitely not what I was used to seeing in high school, I would say. But that's just what it is. I'm doing my best, and I'm just hoping that the second semester I'm able to continue to grow and continue to understand how to develop as a student and as a person. And overall, I would say, although the studyings and the academics have been quite difficult, my experience at Peking University overall has been positive, and I've really enjoyed getting to meet so many new people from all over the world, and also getting to meet the locals, which I was excited about and talking about before I came to China. I think getting to meet the mainland students and talking to them has been fun, although I will say it's been harder to like get close with them, because I feel like there is like this unheard of like gap that no one really speaks of between international students and mainland students. But I think it's understandable because I think there is like maybe that cultural difference for one. And also I think some students might not necessarily look down upon international students, but it's kind of like they don't see you quite the same, because I think for most of the mainland students, they were accepted and admitted through Peking University through the Gaokao exam, the entrance exam, while international students obviously didn't have to take that. So I think because of that, there's also a gap. And also just like the high school experience that we went through was probably also very different. So that's one thing that I would say I was a bit disappointed in, not being able to connect quite as much as I was hoping for with the locals. But I do have quite a few friends that are mainland students, and it's been really fun to kind of get to know them and get to know China as a whole. And living in China overall has been a pretty fun experience, I would say. I do hope that I'm able to travel a little bit more going forward, because I think first semester I was just trying to get accustomed to living in China and being in a completely new country, and also being away from family and becoming independent and whatnot. So I think that going forward, there are so many beautiful places in China that I'm hoping to get to explore. And I'm really looking forward to my next few years at Peking University. And I feel like life is not linear, it's not straightforward, it's ups and downs, and I think that you just have to get used to any challenges and take it head on, approach every day with a positive mindset, and look at the grateful things that there are to be grateful for, rather than constantly focusing on the negatives. And that's just kind of the mindset that I'm hoping to go into moving forward. And I'm very, very glad to be home, but it does feel all kind of like a fever dream, like none of it ever happened. But it did, and the second semester is going to come faster than I think. But looking forward to it, and if you guys are interested in following my journey, if you haven't already subscribed, I would appreciate if you could subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.